Good evening, everyone. My name is Alana Rabinovich, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to the 2022 Giller Book Club, our seventh this year. It is my profound pleasure to introduce you to our interviewer tonight, author and professor Joshua Whitehead. Joshua Whitehead is a Two-Spirit Ojinehu member of Peguis First Nation, Treaty 1. He is currently a PhD candidate, lecturer, and Killam Scholar at the University of Calgary, where he studies Indigenous literatures and cultures with a focus on gender and sexuality. He is the author of Full Metal Indigiqueer, which was shortlisted for the inaugural Indigenous Voices Award and the Stephen G. Stephenson Award for Poetry. He is also the author of Johnny Appleseed, which was longlisted for the Giller Prize, shortlisted for the Indigenous Voices Award, the Governor General's Literary Award, the Amazon Canada First Novel Award, the Carol Shields Winnipeg Book Award, and won the Lambda Literary Award for Gay Fiction and the Georges Bounier Award for Fiction. Whitehead is currently working on a third manuscript titled Making Love with the Land, published by Knopf Canada, which explores the intersections of indigeneity, queerness, and most prominently, mental health through a Neiwa lens. Currently, he's working as an editor for the forthcoming Love After the End, Two-Spirit Utopias and Dystopias to be released in 2019. Tonight, Joshua will be interviewing Casey Plett, author of the novel A Dream of a Woman, longlisted for the 2021 Scotiabank Giller Prize. Please feel free to submit your questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. I won't waste any more of your time, so please help me welcome Joshua and Casey.
Oh, thank you, Elena. And thanks to the Gillers for having us. As I was saying, I'm such a big fan of the book club series, and I'm always excited to be here as a panelist or a speaker, also just in the audience. It's always a fabulous evening. It is my pleasure to be introducing Casey Plett, a dear old friend of mine. We hail from the old expatriate lands of Winnipeg, where we both kind of found our footing as writers. So this is just serendipitous to me to be talking with Casey today. But I do want to introduce her first. So Casey Plett is the author of A Dream of a Woman, seen here, the novel Little Fish, and another collection of short stories, A Safe Girl to Love. She is also the co-editor of Meanwhile Elsewhere, science fiction and fantasy from transgender writers, and the publisher at Little Puss Press. She has written for The New York Times, The Guardian, The Globe and Mail, McSweeney's, Internet Tendency, the Winnipeg Free Press, and other multiplications. She's also a winner of the Amazon First Novel Award, the Firecracker Award for Fiction, and a two-time winner of the Lambda Literary Award. And most recently, her work has been nominated for the Scotiabank Giller Prize. So welcome, Casey. Thanks for joining me here today.
Oh, thank you so much, Josh. I'm really glad we're doing this. I really love that it's the two of us doing this. Thank you so much for doing it. Thank you for all of you in the audience. And thank you to the Gillers for having us. This is going to be a good time.
So Casey, I have to say, I'm just very excited for tonight, but before I begin, because I do want to hear our reading from you, but I do need to say that you made me laugh so much with the pierogi, poutine, and bacon and bannock in Winnipeg. And I also learned that you can roast sour candy. So we're in for a treat tonight, literally and literarily.
I'm so glad.
So Casey Plett, please.
All righty, thank you. I am very glad you took that from the gastrointestinal parts of this book, which I feel very dedicated to. So I'm just gonna read a little bit from a story called Enough Trouble, which is it's technically the second to last story in the book, but it's basically the last story in the book, spiritually, if that makes any sense. So I'm going to read just a short section. This, all you need to know is that the two characters, Gemma and Ava, they are lovers. They are in a small town in southern Manitoba. And this town, Gemma grew up there and left, and Ava has just recently moved here from the city. Okay, here we go. When they'd met that spring, it was at a party on Balmoral. Jem had been texting a friend and then looked up to see Ava sitting next to her. They began talking and their hands and legs moved closer, the way they do when the bodies of women pull to each other without asking permission. They kissed quickly and inevitably. It was all so immediately obvious. They walked to Gemma's in the cool air and made love on her mattress, Gemma's palm on Ava's throat, Ava's body a ghostly crosshatch below her, serrated by streetlight through the blinds. They woke at 10 the next day to an April prairie snow, trudged over to the Nook in pajamas for breakfast, back to Gemma's to spoon and fuck in front of the TV. Late in the evening, Gemma mentioned offhand that she'd grown up in choirs, and Ava asked if she could hear her sing. Gemma got bashful. I can't do that. Ava teased her. Come on, for me? And Gemma relented and sang That Lonesome Road. She'd sung it in high school choir, but she had really learned to sing, Gemma said, in church. Not just at the church she attended with her dad, but also with her Oma, who'd play an upright piano at her house in Mitchell over around Steinbach area. She'd play through hymns on Sunday before services, and she taught Gemma how to sing. You have a beautiful voice, Ava said once Gemma had finished. Thanks. I miss it now, sometimes. Gemma said quietly. That part of my life's gone. And Ava said, I understand. Gemma pulled up YouTube. She said, this is my favorite version of that song, a university choir, Wichita State. It gets done a lot, but it's always too clean. It's too calm. It's too sanitized. It's too joyous. It gets sung like a lullaby. It's not a lullaby. Gemma got emotional suddenly saying that. Next morning, Ava had to book it out early to make it back home for work. That's when Gemma learned she lived out here. You're fucking kidding me, she hooted. That's where I grew up. That's my hometown. That is some janky shit. And Ava blushed and put on her clothes. And at Gemma's front door, they kissed and kissed. And then Ava's face lit like a flame. And she said, let's do this again sometime. Then she left. And Gemma sat on the couch. And the brain deluge of dopamine drained away. And regular life stepped back in front of her, a faceless shape in the doorway. I'll stop there.
Ooh la la. Always a treat. Thank you, Casey. Thank you. Okay, oh my goodness, I don't know where to begin. I was just rereading my notes, and there's a moment where Iris talks about, did you buy a carton of cigarettes? And she goes, no, buying a carton would mean I'm addicted. I was like, if that is not the most Winnipeg, Manitoban thing I have ever heard, I don't know
of course I'm not addicted. I'm out. Do you have smoke?
Yes.
I've already bought 2 packs today.
After karaoke, right? We'll have to do karaoke next time we're in Winnipeg together.
Oh my God, I would love that.
Well, I mean, like, speaking of Manitoba, speaking of Winnipeg, and someone who has like moved around a lot of spaces and places, I'm curious, like, maybe could you tell us a little bit about space or place when it comes to your writing? Within A Dream of a Woman, we moved from Manitoba to New York City to Portland. And again, my favorite town name, Boring, Oregon. Like, what?
It actually exists.
I know. I was like, I kind of want to visit. Just to say I went to Boring.
Right, exactly.
What an icebreaker. What an icebreaker. But I'm curious, like, how does place affect or effect your writing or storytelling? Or maybe, like, how would I say? Is there something about each homeland that offers you something different?
Yeah, it definitely does. I think so. You're not wrong. It's something that I think about a lot when I'm making. So definitely, like, from the beginning when I'm starting to write something, kind of like, where exactly is this is definitely a big part of it. And even sometimes if it's not, I usually name the place where my stuff is taking place. But even when I don't, that also feels, it's very intentional when it starts out. So like, I think for one, I'm always interested in writing places sort of as how people within them actually speak to each other. So when I'm writing, like Winnipeg in fiction, for example, I don't want to start like have all these explanatory paragraphs so someone understands what they are. I would rather them just sort of like, I would rather just sort of like use language that people would actually just say to each other. So hopefully, so if you are from there and if you know the area, then it can be like, oh, that just sounds like the people I know talking, and it will hopefully sound like there will be verisimilitude there. And if you don't know it, then hopefully it can you can kind of pick it up by osmosis, or you can kind of pick it up by feel. I definitely kind of like, so when I first moved to New York, I realized like, oh, there's all these neighborhoods and places that I kind of know about because they're in like so many books or movies, and like who never feels like they have to explain their city to anyone. It's New Yorkers, right? Like,
I could see that. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Like, because of and so all this culture that I had sort of like been like sort of even in stuff like, I don't know, like Billy Joel's Uptown Girl song, there is stuff encoded about the city that you just know from that song, right? And so I think I've always felt like, well, what if I just write the places that I know in the similar way that New Yorkers feel like they can write about New York, and then everyone else who's not from there, like they can keep up, because it's actually like, it's as long as I think you write it in a way that the context makes sense, then you can just kind of do it. You can just kind of do both those things. So that's probably like the lens that I have when I'm like writing a place. Yeah.
I mean, like as soon as we talked about going to a date at sorry, Baked Expectations in Winnipeg, I was like, oh, I've been on many a terrible date there.
Right.
And then you go down to the exchange, go to Kingston, have a couple beers, and forget it.
Exactly, to forget the terrible date. Exactly.
Every time.
Of course. Never. Who has had a good date at Baked Expectations? Like,
I mean, I feel like that was like one of my very first short stories I ever wrote back when I was in my undergrad, was set at Baked Expectations. So it's a staple. It's a staple.
Right.
For those
Exactly.
who have not been,
there you go.
Osmosis, go to Baked Expectations.
Right. It is excellent. Do it, but don't go on a date. But don't go on a date there.
No, never. Platonic, maybe. Well, maybe I kind of just want to bounce off of that. So I just finished teaching a fiction course here at the University of Calgary as a novella form. And I'm curious to like your thoughts. So do you think you like need to exist or be in a place to write about it, as an animate character within your story? Like a lot of my students write about, San Francisco and New York City and Paris as a way of like fleeing the prairies, which is like, I think something like we're very ingrained prairie folks, I feel.
Right.
And like,
exactly.
Through fiction, like the literary, right? And like, so like, what kind of relationship do you think you need to have with the place to make it, a very lively character as setting within your writing?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can still do it. Like, I definitely think you can like, I definitely think you can write about places you haven't been. I just think that probably takes a certain different degree of like care, or a different degree of like, the thing itself will probably be different. Like, and I was thinking this a lot actually with this latest book. So I started writing this story, Enough Trouble, and I knew that it was going to be set in a town that looked very similar to the town I lived in when I was a kid, which is Morden, which is this town in southern Manitoba of like 8,000 people right next to Winkler. And I started writing it in February of 2020. And I originally thought like, oh, you know what? Like this summer, I'm gonna go back to Manitoba, and and then of course, the pandemic hits, and the book was due, and I had to write this whole thing basically without being able to actually. I definitely thought like, and so I had to do it all, and I hadn't been there for years, and I kind of had to do it all from memory, which I was not planning, which was not the intent that the story started out with. And I definitely wrote a different story because of that. So, and like what I've written, I probably would have written a different story if I'd been able to like go back there and kind of like feel stuff out for a while. I mean, my aunt still lives out there. That would have been fine. But that's not what happened, so I didn't. And so, and I think I feel like probably, I think that there is like, I think I feel that way. I think that you can probably write about anywhere, even if you haven't been there. It's just probably, you probably just can't, it's just going to be a different kind of story from, say, someone who has lived there all their lives, or someone who was there once and made a big impression on them. It's just going to be a different kind of story. I don't know. Does that make sense at all?
I think like that makes sense to me. Yeah, I think like I hold a similar kind of ethics around needing to have some type of relation with the, the homeland, whatever you're writing about, to write it truthfully. And as you say, it comes through in like verisimilitude, right? And comes through in like the slang, and it comes through in the actions and the spaces, and the dingy back lanes.
Yes.
Which are very important.
Yes, absolutely, 100%.
I have been to Morden a few times because I used to work for this grocery store, and our work retreat was always in Morden for some reason. So, fabulous place.
Interesting choice. Okay, not to criticize something.
It's a beautiful place, and I guess like
it does have a
I do want to jump into the book a bit, but I'm also interested in just kind of like your writing practices, really. So like you return here to the form of the short story as a collected whole, since your first book, A Safe Girl to Love. And I think personally that you excel like wildly within a small space, such as the short story. It's not something I could do. I'm very verbose. So I'm curious, like, why the short story? What does it allow you to do versus something like a full novel, such as with Little Fish?
Yeah, I think with short stories, especially with short story collections, I kind of appreciate being able to, I think I can I like the idea of, I kind of think I get to have my cake and eat it too, because you don't have to commit to as full of a thing as a novel. You can do these short little sketches, but they can kind of like build to something like a more whole. Like I like to think of them a lot as like albums. So like the order of them is very specific. And so like the idea, and I definitely think of them as like stuff that kind of like each story sort of builds on itself. And so the hope is that they sort of like have the collective like gravity of a novel, but I don't have to write a novel. Novels are hard. But like, yeah, I think there's something of in a short story where I really feel like I kind of have the ability to sketch out whatever length or whatever I want to put in it. So, there's some stories in here that are like 2, 4, 5 pages long, and there's some stories that like grew to be novellas basically because I just kind of kept doing that. And the fact that I get to put them all in a book and sort of space them accordingly and organize them how I wish feels very like feels like artistically freeing, I guess. So yeah, that's what I really enjoy feeling like a short story collection like come together and congeal, and that's something that feels like very attractive to me. Whereas like finishing a novel, Little Fish, just felt like I would just like it was a much less enjoyable process. It was very
the full Pisces experience, Little Fish.
Well, I have no Pisces in my chart, so I had to get it somewhere.
Exactly. You gotta birth it into something. I like what you say about like the album. So I feel like you, as a short story writer and as a short story collection writer, you're like the Adele of Canadian literature. You're like, do not shuffle. You can't go through the songs. You need to listen from front to back.
Absolutely not. It's very intentional.
But there is something to say. I can't ever say I've read a collection of short stories and jumped around. That would be like, I don't want to say taboo, but that would just feel off to me to not have like the full rhythm and the full breadth of the stories, right?
Yeah, exactly. I haven't either. I don't know, like maybe if I'm like rereading something, then I'll kind of like go around, but I don't think I've ever read a story collection first and like not run it all the way through.
The absolute chaos. If you do that, let me know. I'll jump in a bit, but I do want to remind the audience that at the bottom of your Zoom box, there is a Q&A option, which we'll be coming to a little bit later. I have some more questions that I want to ask Casey, but do pop them in there and I will get to as many as I can with you this evening. So I need to turn to Hazel and Christopher. It is probably my favorite story of this collection. I like audibly laughed. I was like viscerally upset at points. I cried. It was just like the full range, the full gamut of emotions, I guess. And with Hazel and Christopher, you have these lifelong friends who, kind of part ways in life and then come back, turn lovers. And I might call it like the refusal to abandon, as queer folks often do in our queer relationships versus straight folks, is that we always kind of have this loyalty to conjoin again and stay community, right? And it's difficult work. It's emotionally, it's full of emotional turmoil. And here in this story, Hazel's partner in life comes out as trans. And Hazel as a character kind of resents herself for quote unquote wanting to hold on to him, right? And I want to read a small excerpt from that story in which Hazel is narrating, how can I honestly start to tell you how happy I am for you? You being Christopher's in terms of transitioning. And sorry, how can I honestly start to tell you how happy I am for you and how much I want him back? I never admit this to anyone, least of all to you. Do you know what it means to be turned into the kind of person you hate against your will? God forgive me. And that line has stuck with me so poignantly since I first read it. And I was reading it again the other night and sharing this with friends and folks, being like, isn't this like the most heartbreaking but truthful and vulnerable line that you've heard in a long time? So I find it very poignant. I find it resonating for maybe queer folks writ large, especially with our first loves who kind of always guide us back into ourselves in some way, shape, or form. So I'm curious, like, how did such a powerful and like a heartbreaking and a difficult sentiment come to be in like something which is heteropatriarchy primarily, among other intersections of imperialism? But when something teaches us or turns us into the kind of person we hate or something that we do dislike against our will, what do we do with that? So I guess it's like kind of a 2-point question, but like, how did that come to be, this kind of very vulnerable beauty? And then, yeah, like how did you what do we do with that maybe outside of the text or?
Yeah, totally. I definitely have answers to both those questions. So number one, like it's funny, this actually kind of sort of kicked off me writing the whole book actually, because I had written Hazel, so this story, Hazel and Christopher, I'd written the first half of it, I think around the same time that I was writing Little Fish. So like, and then I couldn't really figure out how to end it. And then Little Fish grew to be the thing it was, and I kind of put it aside. And then years later, I was trying to finish it. This would have been like early 2019, around there. And there are plenty of times during the story where I was like writing the story, I was like, oh, I wonder if maybe like Christopher is trans too. And I was like, no. And then eventually was like, oh, I keep saying that because I don't want it to be true, because that would be devastating for Hazel. And I kind of don't want to think about what that means. And then eventually I had to confront the fact that like, well, I guess I do have to think about what that means. And probably that, and Hazel will react in really negative ways, and in ways that I think are both wise. Like on one hand, like Hazel knows herself. She knows like, I could try to stay together with you, and I could try to be nice, and I could try to be a good caretaking person. And I just completely know that I am not going to be able to do that. So I am just not going to try to even, like, I'm not going to lie to you, and I'm not going to try to like forestall you. I just know exactly what this means. Even as she also, is pretty, you can, if you come out and then someone immediately dumps you, that's a pretty crappy experience. But then that line you put about like, if you know what it's like to be turned into someone you hate against your will. So one thing that has always struck me is specifically is trans people who transition and then their partners break up with them, but not only just break up with them, but become like vengeful. And I feel like I've known plenty of trans people whose exes are just like really cruelly vengeful in this really horrifying and really mean way, including like custody of kids and things and stuff that is just like really, really rotten. And so I thought like, so that's kind of what she means. She's like, you know what it takes to turn someone you hate against your will, because Hazel doesn't like the fact that Christopher transitioned. And that's what she's admitting to herself. And she's like, well, I hate this. I don't want to feel this way because I know it's bad. I know it's wrong. Like she's probably seen all these other people go through this experience. And so then she has to sit with herself, like, what does it mean when I have sort of like taken on these habits of people who have oppressed me under heteropatriarchy? You know what I mean? Like, what does that mean? What am I supposed to do with that? And Hazel doesn't really have an answer to that, but it is a question I sort of wanted to bring up to the reader, you know, like, and that's why I also do it. She's like, I would never tell anyone this. I would never tell, because it's one of those like intimate, private things that she would just never. I always envisioned her as Hazel sort of like writing this in a diary or something, or like writing one of those letters that you don't actually send to someone, but you need to get it out somewhere.
Yeah.
And so, and I don't know exactly, you know, what you do sometimes with those feelings, or what you do sometimes when you realize that you are acting in ways that are pretty gross, or that you're acting in a way that mimics what really bad stuff have done to people like you. I mean, like, but pretending that those feelings don't exist, or not reckoning with what you've done after the fact, I think probably aren't ways to help. So I suppose what I would hope for Hazel is that she could at least examine herself and be like, why did I react the way that I did? Why, what, the next time I'm probably going to be dating someone else again. So if the next time I date a partner who is a cis boy, I'm going to have to reckon with the fact that this might be a possibility, and I'm probably going to need to be ready for it before I get in another relationship. And I'm going to have to figure that out for myself. That's what I would hope for Hazel.
Yeah.
And that's probably maybe the most I can answer your question.
Oh, that makes total sense. Like, I think even in that story, I'm paraphrasing now, but there's a moment in which Hazel's saying, experiences this type of hurt or pain, and says like, I kind of need to like sheath it, or
Yeah.
encapsulate around it, right? And I think there's like small nuggets that, you know, Hazel gives us, at least from my perspective, in which like we kind of learn to see that like this kind of holding is like poisonous almost, right? So like when I read that, I was like, one, heartbroken, because I think I've also been there. It's like in like, you know, the ruptures of relationships, like kind of coming to face with what it means. I would call it like a reckoning, like RECK, but also like a WRECK reckoning. And it's like a type of shattering that I think we need to undergo as people, to kind of reconfigure, right? And so I see that with Hazel. And I think, yeah, it was just like a line and a sentiment and an image that was like, will stick with me for a long time. So, and a lesson. So I would thank you for that too, among the many gifts that you give us in this book. But that one will stick with me for a long time.
Thank you for telling me that.
And it's funny too, because you're talking about like how this kind of started with Little Fish. And as you know, a novelist myself, I think you and I are both like genre outlaws. I started in poetry, novel, and now I'm an essay. I'm trying to come back to novel. Like, how do I write a novel again?
Right?
And you're like, you're coming back to the short story.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm curious. So like with, you know, A Safe Girl to Love, and with Little Fish, and now with A Dream of a Woman, I'm curious, like, yeah, do you ever find, I guess, how do I say this? Like, how can you tell us like how you start a new novel or a new collection? Because I always find myself haunted by characters, and you so wonderfully hold a universe of characters, which I find so amazing and I'm in awe of. So yeah, I guess I'm curious, like, have you ever felt yourself haunted by past characters, and or like, how do you start a new collection?
Yeah. All the time. But when you say haunted like that, I think what I feel often that maybe kind of rhymes with what you're telling me there is I often feel like a sort of like an urgency, like there's kind of like there's like these characters or these settings, these people that just kind of start like going like this to me. And I always feel like every time I finish, so I finished 3 books of fiction now. And I feel like after each one, I'm like, oh, that was so hard. Like writing books is like, after this, I'm really gonna get my life together. You know, it's time to be an adult. Time to like, time to figure my life out. And then like, eventually, you know, another book kind of starts doing this. Like, and I definitely feel that there are these characters are these settings that kind of eat at me to the point where eventually I'm like, okay, like there's another book here. I've got to do this again. And there are definitely a lot of characters that show up repeated times. So there are two characters, Sophie and Carla, in A Safe Road to Love that show up again. Little Fish, Sophie in particular, is a pretty big part of that book. And then also in A Dream of a Woman, there's characters that recur throughout the stories. I think, are there any stories that come up from the first? I think I might have forgotten. Oh, in Absolution, the novella, there's a couple stories from it. There's a couple of characters from A Safe Girl to Love that kind of like show up and sort of like say hi as secondary characters, and then and then that definitely like, oh yeah, I don't think I was done with those. I think they're still hopping around. So yeah, like I definitely feel like there's something external that's sort of like pulling at me that I've got to like deal with or figure out in fiction, and that's what ends up sort of like pulling me into another book.
Yeah. Is there ever like a moment where like something clicks? You're like, there it is. Like that's the collection or that's the novel, or you just like jump in the deep end and be like, we'll find out what it is later.
No, I definitely don't think I've. So maybe kind of both. I think like there's definitely like a click the first time when I felt like, oh, I've got a book here. Like I think I remember like when I was halfway through Absolution novella, and I remember, and I was starting Philly's, and then one of the characters from A Safe Girl to Love showed up. I was like, oh, like probably like Zoe's in this, and I was like, okay, I think I've started to feel like the book's starting to I could feel like a bunch of like the Tetris pieces kind of go, and I was like, oh, okay, I kind of feel like I've got a handle on this book here. I think we're going. I think I got something. But as far as like figuring out what the book actually is and what it's about, that's like that usually ends up kind of getting revealed to me like usually towards the end, and often after a lot of like sadness and frustration and whiskey and like late night angst and all sorts of things. So
no, I understand that, because like with me, I feel like I can see the house, but the door is locked and all the windows are shuttered, and I'm like moving around like, how the hell do I get in this house? And then the house is haunted, it's on fire, and like
right, yeah, exactly. How do I get out again? Oh no.
You gotta leave breadcrumbs. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Like, I'm glad I'm not the old one who's lost in the abyss at times. And also, like the returning characters, I was like, oh yes, The Safe Girl to Love is back. Like, I love these characters. It's fun that they all kind of exist in this multiverse. And I guess also, like, let's see, like, I'm curious too. One of the stories that I was really drawn to was Perfect Places. And I think it's because like, it reminded me of Garth Greenwell, his book Cleanness, in which he has the short story called The Little Saint. And this little saint is like this kind of BDSM kinkster in which this character visits, and he like eats all this pain. And you have a similar story with Perfect Places, and in which Nicole meets this person, and after like being like, well, I can get D on Grindr real easy, but it's hard for me to like someone. I was like, girl, same.
Right? Who among us?
And then enters into this kink relationship, right? And it kind of reminds me of what you were saying a little bit about, with Hazel and Christopher, and this idea of being like made to hate against your will, due in part to like kind of these experiences which culminate and then like they settle like sediment, right? And it's very different in Perfect Places, in which Nicole doesn't have that sediment, and she's very adamant and vocal about, well, it doesn't matter what happened in the past. I've been through this XYZ. I've been through all this transphobic BS. I'm just here to find desire. And I guess I'll just read another small segment which stuck with me, in which the narration goes, what was shooting through Nicole's mind wasn't the gross stuff she'd heard all her life. No, it was the unemotional responses on their own, sure, whatever, but the cascading, enveloping totality of them, metastasizing in the screen of her ego over the years to scratch down and down into the numb hurt of undesirability she thought she'd accepted, to fully examine its subterranean psychic consequences and line it up with the rejection that she was about to hand to Ant now, it would be, what would it even be? She finished and sent a message. And I was very drawn to this because of like the kind of vivacity and power that Nicole has, and the willingness to, you know, partake in Ant's kinks to kind of fulfill his needs, and then also maybe in some semblance hers. But then there's also a little bit of loss. She's talking about like, you know, I've been through all this, this, and this, but there's still something lost, and she's the one who has to kind of turn off the phone and end it. And I was curious again, thinking about this, of like, well, like, maybe can I say, can you talk a little bit about desire in this book or with Nicole? And is it like obsequious, or is it succumbing in a sense? Or maybe the larger question is like, how do you write such poignant reflections of queer and or trans desire without kind of riddling it to didacticism, maybe?
Thank you. That means a lot to hear that you feel that way. Thank you. I did think about it a lot. It was really on my mind. With Nicole, I think like, you know, a lot of the characters that I've written, I think they don't really, maybe they don't understand their desires, or they don't really listen to their desires, or they're like, well, this is definitely not something that I want, but who cares? You know, like I think that's and then with Nicole, I think when I started writing Nicole, I kind of felt like very much like, oh, this is someone who knows, she's like really easygoing, she's like pretty like she's probably kind of one of the more kind of like calmer, has her shit together characters, but she's also like, I know what things are that I want, and I know what my desire looks like, and that I think has been like a guiding light for Nicole, and has probably like, that has actually kind of like gotten her through a lot of really hard things. Like, she knows the things are that she wants, she knows the things are that she doesn't want, and she refuses to not pay attention to them. And that has been like a way that has probably like done her really well through her adult life. And then in Perfect Places, yeah, I mean, the part you're referring to, she's kind of like, she decides that the stuff that Ant is hot for, she like kind of tries it. She's like, you know what, I don't think that this is for me. Yeah. And that's you know, ordinarily would be a pretty mundane interaction, one she's probably had on both sides of things, you know, where one person is like, nah, that's not my thing. You're like, all right, that's cool, like whatever. But somehow in this instance, the rejection that Nicole has received a lot of her life, because of her being trans, she's always trying to think of like, okay, well, you know what? They're that way because they're that way, and it's got nothing to do with me, and it is not really my fault that society doesn't look as trans women as desirous, and it's not my fault that society has made all these things that make trans women seem as undesirable, or as if they're not real women, or et cetera. Like none of that has anything to do with me. And she's kind of like, I think probably had some really healthy, like kind of mental armor about that. And yet that armor has probably made her sort of brittle in a way. And then when she starts to reject Anne, there's something in her brain that is kind of like lines up with all that rejection, and somehow it just cracks it. And that's probably something Nicole's going to have to deal with in some way. That maybe that all that stuff has hurt her more than she's realized, and that maybe it has kind of created some bitterness or anger or kind of grossnesses in her that she's going to have to address at some point.
Yeah.
And so, and like, yeah, and then part of me, you know, and I think part of her probably would want, actually would kind of like, this isn't in the book, but I always kind of thought of like, Nicole would probably kind of subconsciously probably would like it if Ant was meaner about it, you know, and he's not. And she would like it if Ant was all of a sudden just like a jerk about all this. So she could be like, well, he's another asshole, so whatever, you know, yeah. But like, that's not what happened. So does that make any sense?
It does. Yeah, I agree. Like, I think with, folks like us with intersections, queer folks, it's like, oh, we also have this like intense armor that we've
Mhm.
perfected and, we've removed the dents of when we polish, but it's also damning as times. Like you
Yeah.
say, it makes us brittle, right? And it shuts us off from a lot of experiences. And I think Nicole is a good stalwart lesson in that, with that story, but also as a character. To like also like letting the skin breathe beneath, right?
Yeah.
Um, So I have one quick thing I want to ask before I want to move
Mhm.
to questions from folks. So folks, do throw them into the Q&A, and we'll get to those really quickly. But I have one last question for you, about your experiences behind the scenes of writing, with publishing, right? You've started Little Pus Press, and you've also worked as a publicist for Biblioasis. How has that impacted your writing?
Oh man. Um, no one's ever asked me that before. Uh, I think probably it's like, um, I promise this sounds more inspiring. I promise I mean this in a more inspiring way than it's going to sound. But I think
Ready,
it's
I'm ready.
helped me. Yeah, I think it's kind of helped me reckon with like how so many anxieties that I might have as a writer or worries just kind of like just don't matter. Like as a publicist, for example, I've like seen if you ask me like what makes one book, I don't know, sell a lot more copies than the other doesn't, I'd be like, I could come up with all these answers, but kind of most of it's like,
Yeah.
or I could say like, um, uh, there I think like sort of like knowing kind of like the business side of things beyond the hood, behind the hood. I mean, I see like so much. I kind of like knowing how much chaos there is and knowing how much randomness there is, um, and having had lots of good and bad experiences within the industry and working with people, I think there's some part of me that is sort of almost like they feel just like completely separate parts of my brain, which I've maybe had to do just to like keep myself able to keep writing. But like the part of me that when I'm sitting down on my computer and I'm like, okay, I've got to make, I have to do it because again, that kind of like thing is sort of pulling at me. Um, there's part of me that just knows that that process is something that is kind of like different and maybe something a little more special and internal than like than sort of like the workaday business of publishing, both when I've been an employee and both with running my own press. So for some, like they've actually sort of like the more I've been doing stuff in publishing, the more those two worlds sort of have gone farther apart. And I'd actually say it's probably healthy for me. It's probably good for my writing.
Yeah.
So yeah, does that make it? I don't know. Does that make any sense at all?
It does, yeah. And I think like there may be like, aspiring or writers in this room who
Yeah,
maybe like find the behemoth shadow of things like publishing houses and
yeah,
publicists and agents, daunting, right? And I
yeah,
think
yeah,
like,
totally.
as you know, like you can still be all of those things without having to partake in some of those, machinations. Um,
Absolutely, absolutely.
yeah, and they don't
Yeah, I
legitimize.
don't know what. Say what?
They don't always legitimize someone. Like it's not a stamp of approval. You're a writer, right?
No, no, it's really, really not. Yeah. Yeah, and thank you for bringing that up. I think I would also like say if there are aspiring writers that are here watching right now, I mean, like, yeah, that strange business like world of publishing and agents and book deals and stuff, it's all weird and opaque. And like, but whatever is drawing you to write, whatever's like making you think like this is stuff I want to do. Um, uh, like, pay attention to what's making you want to write and are the things that you want to do. And like, I feel like for me, once I've made stuff, then I kind of try to go interact with the business side of things. But like exactly what Josh said, like um it's not a legitimizing thing. It's not like a stamp of approval. Um, those are readers, and readers are not those things.
Yeah, yeah. I've seen folks on like Tumblr with like writing Harry Potter and Slytherin fan fiction have more readers than I did, and kudos to them.
Right? Yeah, exactly. Right.
Like
Seriously.
brony porn stuff like that is wildly popular. So a reader does make a writer, right?
Really, really does. Yeah, and who's to? I got my. I think one of the first thing I can remember like reading and crying at was like Sonic the Hedgehog fan fiction that I was reading in like the mid '90s. I was very moved. Do I even remember that guy's name? Dan Drazen. I should look him up one of these days. Who knows if
Dan Drazen,
who knows if he's
okay.
even, yeah, exactly. Who knows if he's even writing? Who knows if he's even still around? I probably owe him a coffee.
Yeah, I agree. Fan fiction was where it's at when I was a kid. It always be like from Love
Right.
Kitten 69 XXX. I was like, I love your things.
Wait, was that your screen? Was that your screen name? Was that your
that
fan
wasn't
fiction screen
mine,
name?
but that was like the Tumblr fan fiction names. I was like, I low-key love all of this.
Amazing.
And the wildlands of the early internet days.
Kids these days will never know.
Never.
They've got cooler stuff already, probably. Oh, yeah.
I do want to hear from all of you in the audience, so throw your questions in that Q&A box just at the bottom, and I will get to as many as I can. And let me just, oh my goodness, this is kind of pulling up some. Okay, so this is from anonymous attendee. Oh my God, I feel like I'm on a game show like Family Feud. How did you choose which order your stories were placed within the book?
Ooh, I love answering this question. I really do go back to the album thing. Like I feel very much like which one like flows into another. So like when one ends, does it feel like the next one starts at the appropriate time? Sort of aesthetically. So that's really big for me. But then also I kind of hope like one of the stories can build on another. So also I would even say like as I was shaping each of them, I think about where they're going one after each other, because like one of them is going to talk about another thing. So like by the time you read story X, then you've already read story R, and story X will be able to speak to some things in story R, and I'm going to shape those things in ways that reflect that. So I think what I keep feeling like is almost like what adds up to the whole, like what is going to make the whole sense as a whole work. So one of the reasons I have this, and so the last story, Floodway, is like 2-3 pages. Okay, it's very short. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. It's 4 pages long, and it comes after Enough Trouble, which is like over 100 pages long. But part of the reason I did that was I felt like Enough Trouble very much feels like wrapping up a lot of what the book is talking about, but then also like it doesn't quite feel right at the end. Like I don't think I want to end with that thing. And then Floodway felt like a good sort of like a coda almost, to kind of like an outro to sort of like end the whole work off. So like that's the kind of stuff that's on my mind when I put the story order together. It definitely is something I feel like I care a lot about. Once when I was a publicist at Biblioasis, I remember like there was a story collection we were going to put out. And I won't name which one it is, although I don't think this person would mind me saying so, but still. And like I remember, and the story collection was about to go, and I asked a question about like something, and then both the author and the editor were like, "Oh, I don't really care about the order. Like, I don't know, what do you think?" And I was like, "You're a chaos demon." Like that's. I was just like, I almost felt like I was just like, oh, like I can't imagine. This person also writes like very different story collections than I do, and their book is great. It's like it's fine, but I would just like I never felt like someone was like a precious artist. I was like, oh, like my vision. Oh, like how could you not order? So
Clutch the pearls. Clutch the pearls.
I know exactly. So I am very delicate, very intentional about it.
Oh, that is chaos. Like throwing all the papers up and be like, we'll see where they land.
Right, exactly. Remember, you get to choose.
Yeah. That is like a chaos monster to me. We have a question from Glenn, who is watching from Ottawa, on unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. I wanted to ask you about how you have been part of speculative / sci-fi anthologies. Is that affecting your own ideas about writing as we look to new realms, realities, and things left behind?
Ooh. Yeah, I'm always very, so with my own work, I'm primarily a realist fiction writer, but I'm always very interested and excited about what speculative fiction can sort of offer. So there's sort of two separate works. There's me as like a writer, and then there's me as like a reader and an editor and like a so I'll answer those two separately. As a writer, you know, I read, I don't read as much speculative stuff anymore, but I did a lot as a kid. I read a lot of like sci-fi fantasy stuff as a kid. I watched a lot of that stuff as a kid. And I always feel very like attuned to and like appreciative of when all of a sudden something sort of like non-realist, I'm not sure what a better way to put it, fantastical maybe happens, and all of a sudden you can see yourself, you can kind of feel the work sort of like step through a hole in the wall and you're like in somewhere else. And I'm like, I love that feeling. As a realist fiction writer, I'm very interested in like what that can offer for some of the stuff I want to work with. So for example, when I wrote my first book, A Safe Go to Love, there's a story in it where there's a woman living alone in an apartment and her cat talks to her. And what that felt like to me was this is a sort of way to like communicate, like this person is really alone. This person has like doesn't really have anybody else in their lives. And I was really interested in sort of like, well, I mentioned her as having like a roommate. And I was like, maybe like the only person in this person's life is her roommate. And then somehow it made total sense, like, well, what if the roommate was a cat that she's taking care of? And somehow that just felt like, yeah, that like felt like it got at all of the emotional truths that I was interested to get at. So I just kind of kept running with it. So, and I love when I see that too in like, okay, so one of my favorite movies is Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. And in which, if you, for those who have not seen it, it's basically a breakup movie. It's a movie about a breakup, but it's centered around this idea that this world where you can erase people from their memories. And so the couple gets each other erased from the memory, and it follows like the erasing taking place in someone's brain. But in a lot of ways, it's like, but yet it's like it's definitely like it's a romance. It's like it's like a love story, but it has this completely definitely like sci-fi encasing to it. So I'm really excited by stuff like that, and I'm always, even though like most of my writing isn't fantastical, I always kind of have my antenna up for like when it could be or when that makes sense. Like even for example, in Enough Trouble, you know, that's based on Morden. I mean, there is no small town in southern Manitoba that has like a skyscraper or 50 floors on it. That just doesn't exist. And I was like, well, what if there was? You know, like that'll let me talk about some things I want to talk about, so I'll just do it. As an editor and as a reader, I feel like, I don't know, I always feel like it's kind of a bummer when like that kind of work or genre fiction, quote unquote, is like taken less seriously or is like given short shrift. I think that is a shame. I think that is a bummer. I think that, and love that I think I see that starting to like change a little bit. I'm always really hesitant about saying that in any kind of territory of like, but I feel like I see a little more, less of like a little more of like a softening in terms of like literary gatekeepers and boundary putter-uppers of like of not keeping like sci-fi fantasy or genre fiction sort of like this kind of like walled off thing, which I think it shouldn't be. So that feels exciting. And I also like when I edited Meanwhile Elsewhere, science fiction and fantasy from transgender writers, that was so much fun, and I'm so glad I did it. And I actually tried to, my co-editor, Captain Patrick, I tried to protest at first. I was like, you know, I loved all, like, I haven't like, as an adult, like it's been lots of years since I really like read much sci-fi. Like, I don't think I'm qualified, I don't think. And then she was like, I do, like, I'm fine. Oh, and then she also said, she said something that stuck with me. She said, Casey, the reason I want you to work with me on this is because I want science fiction to be treated with the same care and respect and literariness that literary fiction gets. And I want you to help me with that. And I was like, oh, okay. Like,
Yeah. Yep.
Sure, that makes lots of sense. So does that answer your question, lovely person who asked this question? I feel like I just answered like 10 different things.
You gave us a lot to think about, and I think I'm in full agreement with you in thinking about the limitations of genre and form. And I think, just to quickly preface, like I always say, like, if I'm going to be decolonial on the land, I also need to be decolonial on the page, and to let genres bleed and, you know, leak through genre and form. And sometimes a good story is horror, and it's sci-fi, and it's realist fiction. And these like these boundaries and these borders are just like, they're literally like man-made, like Whitehead cis, heteropatriarchal, capitalistic, colonial, right? And so I think it's like the work of, like, you know, folks like you, you know, like Black sci-fi writers and genre writers, Indigenous writers of that same genre, to like show them that there are loopholes in which all genres are just, it's just story at the bottom of it all. And what really genre is just capitalist market published, like just kind of like fiction, it's fiction, and it goes on this part of the shelf. So I'm also on the same thing of
I'm slamming my fist on my table in agreement here with all of us.
Yeah, let them bleed. So we have time for one more question, and this comes from Janice. Have you ever had one of your characters surprise you with a turn they have taken in their story arc?
Yes, all the time. Goodness, what's a good example? Well, Christopher, for one, I've already given you the backstory behind that one. Or maybe that wasn't, actually that's maybe the opposite of a surprise, because I knew it was coming. I didn't want to admit it. But yeah, there's definitely been times when I've been like, oh, maybe this is why this person is doing it this way. And then all of a sudden I can feel like so many doors in the book kind of like open up, and I'm like, okay, that's it. That's what's going on here. And I feel like it's really lovely to kind of like let your characters surprise you at that point, and kind of like be open to the idea that like, maybe this kind of like thing I had set out for them, maybe that's not true. Maybe I've got to, you know, be open to the idea that it's something else. So yeah, I would say my characters surprise me all the time, and I love that feeling. There's like few things more that feel kind of more like whole making, honestly, whole as in WHOLE, that like feel that way in the writing process. I mean, sometimes, you know, I'm like, oh man, I've got to rewrite all this. Like, so sure, sometimes like, oh, it's gonna be a lot of work, but it always feels very satisfying. It feels very good to have characters surprise you. I think that like the character of Vera in Absolution in Dream of a Woman, that was, I think she ended up like a lot stronger and a lot more like, she had like a lot more strength in her than I sort of like realized at first when I started writing her in the first chapter. And I was like, oh, like I've underestimated you. Like, you got me, you know. Or like I would even say that about Nicole. Actually, Nicole surprised me. I think she started out as very similar to a lot of other characters, and she ended up this much more sort of like this kind of quieter, like much more sure of herself person that I knew going in. And then of course, you know, the complexities and drawbacks of that surety within also revealed. But yeah, no, that happens all the time, and I love it.
Yeah, I will say, on a quick last note, Vera and Iris, I will stand forever. And I think like I can see like the surprises, because I was like, there are so many tender queers in this book who become badasses. Christopher is one, Vera, pre-transition is one. So I love the metamorphosis of these characters.
That means a lot. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I think we're out of time. Casey, I just want to thank you so much for A Dream of a Woman, for the full oeuvre of Casey Plett that you've given us, the insights, the wisdom, the laughter, the tears, and all of that joy. So thank you so much. Thank you to the Gillers. Thank you to everyone who joined us tonight. And I will pass it off back to Elena. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Casey, the Adele of Canadian literature, and to Josh, king and queen of critique and the written word. This was a fascinating and invigorating conversation. Thank you so much. This interview for our viewers will be available on our YouTube channel over the next couple of days, so please check us out there and tell your friends. And please join us on May 2nd to hear Lynn Cody interview Rachel Rose, author of The Octopus Has Three Hearts, longlisted for the 2021 Scotiabank Giller Prize. If you subscribe to our book club mailing list, you'll be sent a registration notification. If not, please visit our website for information. Thank you so much and good night.